You are listening to
Extinction
Radio. Get the podcast at extinctionradio.net.
So let the gangster-esque rap music paint a picture, and I'll hit you with some evidence-based predictions. Get ready for wars, famines, droughts, floods, hurricanes, heat waves, murders, thugs, chaos, refugees, stress, disease, extinction, disaster, IPCC. Wars, famines, droughts, floods, hurricanes, heat waves, murders, thugs, chaos, refugees, stress, disease, extinction, disaster, IPCC.
All right, so our guest today at Extinction Radio is Guy Lane. He's the author of a book, What Comes Next? And it's a retrospective on abrupt climate change, and he's a paradigm shifter. So welcome, Guy Lane from Brisbane, Australia. Good to see you here today.
Thank you, Jennifer. Very happy to be here on your show.
Oh, well, that's great. So you've just written a book, and it's very, very recent. I've just read about half of it, What Comes Next? And
Yeah.
it's basically kind of a wake-up book about abrupt climate change and the more than abrupt climate change, the implications of abrupt climate change. And you go into tipping points as well. So could you tell us a little bit what moved you, and why did you go and write this book, and what's it about? What's the deal with what comes next?
Yeah. So what comes next? Climate change, the future, and you is the full title. I've been involved in an inquiry about life and Earth for 30 years of my life. And professionally, for 16 years, I've been involved in carbon auditing and sustainability. And I'm a thought leader in this space. I'm constantly looking for new ideas, because the sustainability conversation is actually tends to sort of solidify around certain themes, and it's not enough. We need more ideas. And so I look for ideas. And about 6 weeks ago, and I write fiction novels, so I'm a competent writer. I've got 9 fiction novels, all based around sustainability themes. And so I'm a guy that likes to learn things, and I like to share the things that I learn. It's an important subject. But about 6 weeks ago, I had a sort of an insight that I'd sort of built up this body of knowledge that was quite specialist, and particularly around these ideas of abrupt climate change and the implications of that. And I was actually at a market, and I was talking to people about sustainability, and just realizing that there was this very low level of knowledge in the public. So I just had this bee in my bonnet, and I drafted in a week the book, and then over the next few weeks packaged it up, got some editing and an editor onto it, and then I've released it as a self-published work, and I'm promoting it. And basically the core part of the story is explaining in very simple layman's terms, the issues underpinning the potential blue ocean event that's coming sometime in the next few years, and how that will then destabilize the Northern Hemisphere's weather, and how the whole planet is interconnected, so nobody's going to escape from that. And so that's the big part of it. So it's a wake-up call that we're running out of time, and that if there's anything can be done, that the time is now before it gets really, really difficult. But then I sort of look at some of the sort of broader, I have in the book some scenarios, 3 scenarios for the future. And I draw, and what actually really helped to write the book was a book that I found just a few months ago, or a month ago, called The Light of the Stars, which is written by an astrophysicist who's saying that if you actually look at the numbers now, we believe that there are trillions of planets in the universe that have civilizations. And all of them.
Oh, that's fabulous. What was the book called again?
So it's called, I think it's Adam Frank, I think the author's name is, and it's called Light of the Stars.
Oh, how lovely.
And he goes through this whole, and that's what the book is about. It's about exo-civilizations. And he says that if you do the numbers, even if it's extremely unlikely that a planet has a civilization, there are so many planets. So when you do the numbers on that, they're saying there are trillions. He said hundreds of trillions. And so he said they probably all go through a similar pattern that we go through. They have their own Anthropocene. They probably have their own climate crisis. And he says, so he's done some modeling. And he says, look, on the basis of our modeling, we believe that there's these 4 outcomes of civilizations. 2 of them is that they go extinct. The 3rd is that they collapse and get so cruel that they can't get back up again. But the 4th is that they actually figure it out. And so what I've done in the book is that on one hand, I've said, look, here's the reasons why we're all screwed because of this blue ocean event and we're falling apart. But over here is a counter argument that whilst it's kind of not as strong and you're sort of grasping for straws a little bit, here is an idea that says that civilizations, one of the options is that they can actually pull through. And so I've created 3, just to make it really simple, I've created 3 scenarios, one of which I call drowning, which is basically the near-term extinction, or the longer-term version of near-term extinction, you know. The other one is near drowning, which is basically a collapse event which cruels civilization, but doesn't kill it entirely. And then the 3rd one is learning to swim. And so then I'm thinking, well, if we're going to learn to swim, you know, what tools have we got? Is there any antecedents? What have we got out there that could help us? And so I talk about Gaia. And so there's new ideas coming out about Gaia. And Gaia, of course, is this idea that all the living things on the planet behaves like a single living organism. It maintains its own internal balance.
Did you consider James Lovelock and his work as well?
Well, this is Gaia. This Lovelock developed Gaia theory.
Yeah, exactly.
From his 1974 book. But there's a new paper out called Gaia 2.0, and basically what it's saying is that, and this is what Adam Frank was saying as well, he says that the civilizations that collapse are the ones that partner with the biosphere, are the ones that work with the biosphere. And the ones that obviously collapse are the ones that degrade it, which is exactly what we're doing. So there's a framework by which you can actually say, well, if we just started doing that, then if it's not too late, and it might already be too late, if we actually find a way to partner with the biosphere. See, nature's really good at doing things, like nature's really good at stabilizing climate, but because we've put so much carbon into the atmosphere, she will eventually fix it. Like, nature is not at risk, Gaia is not at risk, right? But if humans can actually find a way, maybe we can actually enhance the mechanisms that Gaia uses to sequester carbon. And if we can do that on a large enough scale, we can A, buy ourselves some more time, and secondly, potentially even find our way clear into a stable climate sometime next century. I don't know if that's possible, but I know that there are a lot of people looking at it.
Sure, there are a lot of people looking at it. So given those three stages of humanity, you know, whether we're not drowning, near drowning, and then kind of given, you know, needing to do carbon sequestration, that takes an awareness, right?
Yeah.
So where are we at, in your opinion, in that paradigm of being awake enough to actually do something about our own demise and grapple with it?
I think we're we're a long way away from being awake. And so one of the things I wrote in the book is to try and be objective. It's very difficult to be objective about the extinction of your own race and the destruction of the planet that you live on. It's hard to have objectivity. So I create in the book a thought experiment called the alien bet. And so if you imagine that there's a spacecraft passing Earth, and these aliens are really intelligent. They've downloaded all the data. They know everything about humans. And one says to the other, what do you reckon? Do you reckon there'll be any humans left when we come back 100 years from now? And so it's like completely objective. They've got no stake whatsoever in the fate of the planet. Remember, there's hundreds of billions of us, civilizations. So what's one extra? So if I were to look really, really objectively and strip away my ego and my wishful thinking, my feeling is that we're probably more likely to near drown than learn to swim. I think we're going to, I don't know. And this is something that a lot of people who are in this space really say. I don't know what the future holds, right? Nobody does. So I can't say for certain that we're all going to go into an extinction event. I can say for certain that I can say for reasonable certainty that if we don't make a fundamental shift in the way that we behave on this planet, we will all go extinct. There's no doubt about that. If we tip into a hothouse phase, and this is a paper that came out recently called Climate Trajectories in the Anthropocene, it's saying that the planet doesn't stick around at this temperature long. It either wants to be in a cool phase, where we've been, the glacial sort of phase, or it goes into this hot phase. And if it goes into the hot phase, then that's basically a Permian extinction-like event, and that wiped out most of life on Earth, and we'll be one of the first to go. So if we continue pushing the carbon in the atmosphere at 30 gigatons per annum, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that we are toast. The question, though, is whether we can actually pull that back, stop doing that, and sequester carbon fast enough to avoid these tipping points. And that's the big question. My feeling is that there's so much momentum built up into the system, it's going to be very difficult for us to turn off or turn around civilization in time, and which leads to this collapse event, which leads to this near drowning.
Yeah. So Guy, you consider yourself a paradigm shifter. I think that's very interesting. So you are interested in the mass consciousness of humanity, and you're of the understanding that we have to come to some sort of understanding of our crisis. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's pretty clear to me that so long as most of the public are either unaware or not caring about this subject matter, then they're not going to be prompted to make informed decisions and do whatever is possible in their realm to actually do. And so at some point, there needs to be a way to have everybody go, I get it, I can see that something's going on. And that is really difficult. Every time I was sitting with a local politician the other day talking about abrupt climate change, and you could just see it was going completely over her head. She just didn't get it. I made reference to one little project, and she said, "Oh, that's a great project." So she got the idea of a little project that had a carbon benefit, but the actual concept of we've got to paradigmatically shift the way that we relate, we've got to change the way that we run cities. That's really hard. It's a difficult thing.
Well, I would say that the media is complicit in this deception. I mean, there's nothing about this on the mainline media, and it's just nonstop nonsense, distraction, politics, drama, things that really don't matter. When we are actually heading off of the cliff, we may have already left the cliff. That's a matter of opinion. But it's not acknowledged in the general media. What do you think of that?
I agree. I agree completely. If you look at the stuff that makes it onto the front pages of the newspapers, it's completely immaterial. It's invisible, and part of it is I don't fully understand how that is. One way of looking at it is that the media is basically a profit-making machine, and nobody wants to hear these stories. And there's actually a reason for that. There's a phenomenon called the Cassandra effect, which is this psychology idea that we don't like to hear bad news. I was reading about this in my studies recently, and there was this story about in Africa they did AIDS testing on these people, and nobody came back to the hospital to pick up the results because nobody wanted to know. And even when they offered to pay people to come and get their results, I don't want to know the bad news. So what are you going to put that on the front page of the newspaper? Hey, we're all dying. It's not good business, and that's what they are. So, and people just don't want to accept it. They don't want to have the conversation. It is emotionally challenging, and we've got no referential frame. I come along and I sit down with the local politician and I say, hey, I'm Guy Lane, I've got an environmental science degree, master of business, entrepreneur, I do these different things. By the way, did you know the whole civilization's about to collapse? And she's like, who the hell is this guy? I've never heard that before. Where's my referential frame for this strange person that came in and told me this grim story?
So you mean that you've been telling people the truth and they're not welcoming you with open arms? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I don't have a lot of friends anymore. And the small group of friends that I've got are people that know exactly what's going on. And this is sort of what this is what came to me recently when talking to these people in the market, is that's why I wrote this book. I wrote this book in this way, is to try and bring lots of people into this conversation who maybe had it before, and to actually be honest and scary about it, but also say, look, it's not certain, but if we're going to fix this thing, we need to wake up really, really quickly.
Yeah. Well, it's the right length. What Comes Next can be read in about 2 hours. It's an easy read. It's an engaging read. It's an irreverent read. You're very kind of, off the cuff, and you're very frank, and I think it's very engaging. So, you've got the right length. You can't really hold people's attention for very long these days. So, I think that, hopefully you'll get a good running and get some takers on this very important book. So what are some of your conclusions in What Comes Next? Do you have faith that human nature will change, behave, or anything like that?
I don't make a prognosis about what will happen, but I outline like those three scenarios. So one scenario, here it is, it's just collapse. It's just awful. I say that, the climate system of the Northern Hemisphere goes haywire as this blue ocean event kicks in. 90% of humans live in the Northern Hemisphere. Israel and Palestine is in the Northern Hemisphere. Saudi Arabia and Israel are in the northern, and Tehran. Iran is like 99% of the nuclear power stations are in the northern hemisphere. All of the nuclear weapons are up there. If it all goes crazy up there, it goes crazy everywhere. So so here's your disaster scenario. It's just staring us in the face, right? And then over here we've got another argument. So Paul Gilding, who's an author of a book called The Great Disruption, talks about this stuff, says we're going into collapse. There's an interview that I refer to in the book where he's talking with the woman that runs the climate mobilization program. And he says to her, if you think it's unreasonable or difficult to get your head around that governments will one day wake up and take expedient and effective action on climate change, he said, if you think that is unreasonable, he says, how unreasonable is it that they will do nothing while civilization collapses around their ears? He says, something will happen. And I've got this this embarrassing story that I'll share right now. It's just a way of making an analogy to that. I was at this party once in a place called Yandina on the Sunshine Coast north of here. And it was an outdoor party next to the river. And the guy that owned the property, he said to me, pointed at this old Rottweiler dog. And he says, that is the most feared dog in Yandina. And I'm like, bullshit. Anyway, so later on, because I don't know, it wasn't a good idea, I now know. But I prodded the dog with a stick. I didn't hurt it, I just kind of tickled it. And I'm not even sure that it even really looked at me. I think it might have just raised one of its eyes just to sort of size me up. Then about an hour later, I'm walking past this dog. We don't even see it laying in the grass. And it leaps out and it bites, it sinks its carnassial teeth into my calf muscle. And I'm like, oh, I jump back and I throw my hand out to defend myself. And it sinks its carnassial teeth in my hand. And I walk away, like, bleeding profusely after this fucking dog attacked me, right? And then I'm thinking, anyway, and then I'm thinking, maybe A, I shouldn't have tickled it with the stick. And I'm thinking, B, maybe it actually is a dog that's worthy to be feared. Now, I tell that story in order to recount this. When governments wake up, we haven't yet to see a government wake up to this climate and act with the necessary alacrity, speed, intensity, and capacity that is called for. We have seen absolutely nothing yet. And this Paris Agreement has basically made them comatose and lazy. When governments wake up, they can do incredible things. Look at the American government during the time of the mobilization for the war economy in the Second World War. In the space of 4 years, they turned that entire system around. They got the wise people in to sit down and say, how the hell are we going to do this? And they put it in place. They had, they taxed corporations heavily to find the money. So we have yet to see anything that even approximates even the beginnings of a response. But when
well, we here in America take pride in arguing about whether climate change is real or not.
Yeah, same in Australia. We've got a born-again Christian running the country now. So but what I'm saying is that when that happens, then all of a sudden the dynamic changes, and all of a sudden things that are now impossible become possible. And sequestering huge amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere, it seems like it can actually be done on a very, very, very grand scale. And this is through agricultural practices where you change the way you manage land and sequester carbon. One of the projects I worked with years ago was this guys had created this probiotic solutions that you put them on the soil, and this was sucking up 15 tons of CO2 per hectare just in the top few centimeters of the soil. Huge amounts. Are you
kidding? It's just like a soil treatment that's probably good for the soil anyway, and it sucks up carbon.
Well, so what happens is you put this stuff on the soil, and it basically kicks off it's like microbes, right? And so the microbes jump in there, and they're photosynthetic microbes that photosynthesize and they grow. And they actually, one of the things that they do is they actually create water in the soil. And basically you end up with a soil with more organic material in it. And as the organic material grows, it's sequestering carbon because it's carbon based. And not only that, it holds water better. It's got better water retention. It's got better nutrient retention, so you don't have to keep putting the nitrogen fertilizer, which uses the greenhouse gas. So there's lots of these techniques. And I'll just recount one more thing. So one of the you know, and this is on the sort of the side of the argument that says if we wake up and act really quickly, then we might be able to like slow it down. If not stop it, then give us more time, right? But one of the really fascinating conversations, I've been transcribing some interviews with a guy called Peter Fikowski, right, who's part of a program called Climate Restoration. He was invited in by these climate people to help them lobby Congress in America for a carbon tax. And he said, why do you want a carbon tax? He said, what are you trying to achieve? And they said, well, we don't really know what the target is. So he went about trying to figure out what a sensible climate target would be. And what he found was there's no scientific argument. It's a moral argument. We should get it back the way it was. We should restore the climate to the way it was. So that's 300 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. So he starts talking to these boffins and people and technologists and saying to these people who are doing sequestration, this technique that you've developed, can you scale that up to 50 gigatons? Can you scale that up to 10 gigatons per annum? And these people says, we've never been asked that question before. And so here we are facing the extinction of our civilization, most of the living things on the planet. And it's not like there are unanswered questions. There are thousands of unasked questions. And so this doesn't make me feel full of optimism and hope, hey, we've discovered something. It just makes me feel more circumspect to say that it's inevitable that our demise is coming to us.
Do you think that we have the capability to wake up and ask those questions? Do you think our cognitive dissonance is like so huge that we can't even look at this problem?
Well, to draw an analogy, and I refer to this in the book, you know, if you told the people of Hiroshima the day before what was going to befall them, you do that as a thought experiment. What would you conceivably have to do to inform the people of Hiroshima about what is about to happen? You know, so I don't even know if it's possible to wake people up. Another example that I refer to in the book is, you know, the people that lived through 6 years of war in Aleppo had probably seen it all. But would they have believed what came next when the Russians intervened in the war and they started dropping bunker buster bombs on the underground hospitals? You know, and so there's this phenomena of humans that we just are so incapable of changing our direction that we just walk over the cliff. And so there's evidence to say, no, we're not going to wake up. But then there's things that we've got now that we didn't have. We've never had such scientific certainty. We've never had the internet. You know, with this stuff, it's a different equation. So is it possible to wake people up? I don't know, maybe. And the other thing, and I refer to this in the book, is you don't need to wake everybody up. We don't need to wake up everybody. We only need to wake up probably 10 or 20 or maybe 30%, maybe not even that much. In one of the papers I referred to in the book is saying that if the 10% of a public hold a very firm belief, that belief will translate. And at the end of the day, nobody really cares where the energy comes from to run the house. Nobody gives a damn whether it's solar or coal. They just want the light to come on, right? And so at the end of the day, the public won't stop. The public aren't going to go into bat for the fossil fuel industry when the crunch comes, right? So if we've got to turn off the fossil fuel industry, it's not like the public is going to go crazy and say, you leave those poor people alone. They just want their electricity. In Australia right now, it is cheaper to produce solar power than it is to produce energy from existing coal plants. And yet then the system has not yet shifted because of the corruption in the system with the powerful elites that control through legal and non-legal means the media and the government. You know, I always thought that as soon as renewables were cheaper than fossil fuels, that it would flip really quickly. I hadn't anticipated how much momentum or how much inertia there is in that change. And you can see that with the federal politicians in this country. They're absolutely adamant to ensure that the people who maintain the fossil fuel industry are not disturbed. And there's billions and billions of dollars. There's $40 billion a year of exports out of this state alone. So will the public wake up? One of the other documents I refer to in the book, it's an article and it says, you know, that we won't, the Western people won't. respond to climate change until lots of white people are dying from it. So maybe that's what's going to happen. Maybe we've got to have these Cat 6 hurricanes knock our tall buildings down before people go, what the fuck is going on? Mm-hmm. And then, hopefully, if it's not too late, we can then see the full force of governments coming in and implementing wise strategies and sequestering carbon and transitioning. And so, you know, there's scenarios. I don't know what's going to happen, but but collapse of some form or another seems inevitable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something definitely is going to happen. You can feel it. You know, you can feel.
I call it the quickening. You get this sort of go outside and you can just sense it. You sense it. You see it sometimes. There was a photograph I saw the day after that hurricane went through Hong Kong. Instead of giving everyone a couple of days off to mop the house up, everybody piled into there's a photograph of thousands of people in the metro, just thousands and thousands of people all crammed in, and you just have this sense of like there's so many people on this planet. There's so much stuff. Every time you see one of these big hurricanes go through and the roofs pull off and you see all that plastic insulation flying out of the buildings, it's adding to the plastics in the ocean problem. You just feel this exponentiality of the problem. You know, it's like, you know.
Yeah. Well, there are just too many of us, and we keep increasing and increasing and increasing. I don't know why we can't stop having children, at least for a while or less or something. I mean, you're absolutely right about that. Well, one thing that you cover a lot in What Comes Next, you give us a little retrospective of the Arctic and the consequences of, and you really do focus in on the Arctic a lot as a tipping point. Do you believe that the Arctic is a tipping point for climate?
I think there's lots of them, but it seems to be the biggest one. It seems to be the one that is a lot of study, lots of effort goes into the Arctic. But there's other tipping points as well. But what's really fascinating actually about tipping points, because normally you don't know a tipping point until you've passed it. And what is really fascinating about the Blue Ocean event as a tipping point is, like we were talking before, you can actually just go and look at the charts. They update the charts every day from these multiple satellites and that biomass measure of the Arctic. And then you can actually go and look at it day by day by day, and you can then extrapolate the trend, and you can see the tipping point coming. And the physics of it are very, very simple as well. I mean, the amount of energy required to melt a gram of ice would raise a gram of water 80 degrees Celsius. And so the physics is really clear. The understanding of how the weather systems of the Northern Hemisphere operate with the dipole, which is if it's cold at the top and warm on the equator, you've got this cycling of heat and air, which is what drives the system. If the dipole collapses, the jet stream collapses. And we've just seen in the last couple of years very clearly what happens when it all goes haywire. And that's when we've still got ice. And so when there's no ice, and then we know, and this is, I use this analogy in the book, if you've got a glass with ice in it, you know that if you're outside on a hot day, drinking, you know that as soon as the ice goes, your drink gets warm. I mean, so here's a tipping point that we can actually see coming towards us day by day. That is extremely valuable from the perspective of communicating to the public. When I lived in Sydney for a year, and when I was in Sydney, I was selling commercial solar powered systems, big 100 kilowatt systems to clubs. And I had all these clubs on my books, and there was this really long process of getting these guys to sign up. Every morning, my sales manager would ring me up with this alarmist tone, and he'd say, "Oh my God," he'd say, "the government is talking about cutting the feed-in tariffs. Quickly, you've got to buy now. And this is a sales technique. Buy now. Don't think about it and buy tomorrow. Buy it now. Act now. And so that alarmism is what he tried to instill in me. I was a little bit more, not so alarmist with my clients. But with this, that's where the Blue Ocean event comes in, the tipping point that you can see coming. Here is your reason to buy now, because we can see it coming. And so there's a story in there, and as a storyteller, you can see how that is a really powerful narrative, which then helps to sort of hopefully wake people up and then get them to do whatever it is that they need to do. And I don't specify in the book what people should do, except that they should learn more and organise and get. I don't say that you should go and do this particular thing, because that will unfold as time comes by anyway, what people should do. But certainly as a tipping point, I think that the Arctic is definitely one of the biggest ones. But there's also, you know, the Amazon's drying out and is now a carbon source, whereas it used to be a carbon sink. You know, we're losing carbon sinks everywhere, which is just exacerbating the problem. But Arctic is definitely the big one, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you like to take a look at a few pictures? We've just passed the
yes. Let's see that
tipping point for the Arctic. Let me see if I can bring us over to my screen and like to just take a look. You know, we've just crossed the low point. I think I said tipping point. I was scrambling here.
Yeah.
We've just passed the low point for the Arctic sea ice. So I thought we'd take a look at a few pictures and see how did the Arctic sea ice do this year. And of course, as you mentioned, you know, the Arctic is a giant tipping point, and you know, one of the big concerns is methane, as we can see here. You know, once the sea ice melts, the buffer is gone, and then the methane hydrates is going to start coming out as they have been. And we've seen that the methane levels have been going up, and I think that that's one of the huge concerns right now, you know.
And that's really scary. I mean, if you took methane out of the equation, somehow said, okay, well, that's actually not a problem, we've still got all the other problems. You know, so you just go and add methane in there, and of course the albedo, the albedo effect, which is there's less ice to reflect the sunlight away,
right?
You know, and so you know, I mean, it just seems to be like one thing after the other. And that's just in climate change, you know. And in the book, I refer to the planetary boundaries, of which there are 9. And all of these planetary boundaries are triggers that could lead to the non-habitability of the planet. There's 9 of them. And so we spend all our time talking about climate change, but one of the other boundaries is called biogeochemical flows, which is to do with nutrient pollution in the ocean, causing these dead zones. And so there's another one. And then you've got, you know, stratospheric ozone. So you know, this is just one of many things that's going on.
One bad thing that can happen.
but really this is one which is most visible and seeable, and, you know, and so it's definitely worth looking at. And that graph that you just put up, exactly. I mean, it just shows, you know, at the very lower part of that graph, it's got the letters number 0. And if you extrapolate the trends there, it gets to 0 sometime in the next you know, few years. I say few years in the book, by which I mean 2 to 3. I was watching Paul Beckwith doing the sums on this the other day. He's suggesting more likely to be a few years beyond that again, maybe 2022, I think.
I've been hearing that a lot too. So that's like 4 years from now. So, you know, I guess the Arctic is melting down less quickly than those of us who are staring at it all the time think it's going to happen. So there seems to be like some sort of resiliency or entropy within the system. It doesn't just like fall apart all at once, right?
And look, the you know, Gaia, the living system on the planet, and in Gaia theory, it states that the living systems on the planet actually coordinate or dictate, if you like, the amount of carbon in the atmosphere and how the whole system fits together. You know, this has been around for 3.5 billion years. So, you know, it knows how to look after itself.
Right.
And it doesn't flip quickly. But that said, if you actually look at it on its geological time frame, it is flipping extremely quickly. So on the time frame of Gaia, what is happening now in the Arctic is like zoom, really fast. But in the time frame of humans who are like, you know, come on, you know, it's not really happening fast enough, you know, almost. So it's a sort of the relative timeframes of it. But if you look at the Permian extinction, which was 250 million years ago, where 90% of the species in the ocean died and 75% on land, or the other way around, I can't remember, but fast die off, the great dying, they call it. That was caused by increase in CO2 and methane. The ocean got too hot, stratified, went deoxygenated, died, probably went into that can-filled ocean state where it releases the hydrogen sulfide. Awful. And that took place over 20,000 years, they think. Okay, we've done the same thing hundreds of times faster. So we're actually creating the same conditions on the planet as the Permian extinction, but we're doing it at this rate of global capitalism's rate, which we do it in 200 years. You know, that's phenomenal. There's no analog for that. And yet it hasn't happened yet, and it's all a prognosis of what happens thereafter. But it's not looking good, you know.
No, it's not looking good at all. We're looking at a sea ice thickness map here that was captured at the low point of the Arctic sea ice for 2018. And you can see there's really very little ice that's over 2 meters at this point. So most of the ice is going to be either like even less than a meter, you know?
Yeah.
And then it's like very flexible because it's so thin. So, you know, it rocks a lot, you know, with the, you know, if there's ever any cyclone activity or something like that, gets broken up a lot easier. It's fragile and it's not old, it's new ice. So yeah,
and,
you know,
and one of the reports came out, my understanding is at the top of, or the at the top of Greenland there, where the thickest ice is normally compacted against the shore. That apparently had broken up and disappeared because of the action of the and so that was sort of like a harbinger in that was the thickest and the oldest and the greatest accumulation, and all of a sudden the satellite photograph comes up and it's
we're just one good cyclone away from you know, just destroying the ice on the top of Greenland, and it did open up, and if it closed back up, it looks like it got closed back up in this particular picture, but it did open up, and it's not all that resilient. So the Arctic sea ice is all going away.
I'll give you an interesting anecdote. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who's an academic who does research, and she spent time in Iceland. And she was saying that in Iceland, in the southern part of Iceland, is the biggest glacier. That's it there, And apparently this glacier is now melting so rapidly in summertime that it's flooded the national highway. So there's a single ring road that goes around Iceland. And for most of last summer, or this summer, the road has been impassable because of the flood waters coming off this glacier, which is simply cut off. So if you wanted to go from one side of the glacier to the other, now you've got to drive all the way around the island. He's saying also that there are so many icebergs now floating past because of the breakup of you know, the calving events on Greenland, that a lot of these icebergs are actually now have got polar bears on them. So they're getting they're getting these polar bear interactions in Iceland where they don't normally have polar bears, and everyone's going like, hey, what the hell's a polar bear doing here? So they're shooting them.
Oh my God.
You know, and so here's us having this conversation about the Arctic. And I'm like, those guys are in the Arctic, you know, they're dealing with it, you know.
Oh my God. I did not hear about that polar bears on the icebergs. That's crazy.
Yeah. It's like, wow, you know. I tell you, actually, just another polar bear story. As I put this book out the other day, I posted on Facebook, and I get a lot of, when you go out in public and talk about this stuff, you attract a lot of bad energy. But I had this very strange guy. It was this strange guy. I looked at his Facebook page, and he's like totally into red Ferraris. And the other thing he's into is bagging the hell out of me over polar bears, because I'm saying somewhere in the book that polar bears are in trouble because of climate change. Oh no, he says polar bears are doing just fine. And he found this paper from somewhere where they've done a census of polar bears and found that there were more polar bears than they'd thought. Maybe it was a statistical thing to do with how they count polar bears. So this red Ferrari guy is haranguing me, and he's trolling me, sending me emails.
Oh my God.
calling me on polar bears. So I said to my friend the other day that I was talking to about Iceland, I said, just bring me up to speed. How are polar bears under climate change? Oh no, fuck. She says, polar bears are fucked under climate change.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
people are going to believe whatever they want to believe,
Yeah. Anyway,
Oh.
it's funny. Yeah, look, not good. So, but anyway, it's not going to be Blue Ocean event tomorrow. Not going to be Blue Ocean event next year. So if we can find some magic tonic, put something in the water supply that gets people to go, and then everybody starts doing what we need to do. The way I see it, I really take Gaia to heart. I believe that the all of the living things on the planet are a part of a single living thing, right? I believe that I am a cell in a body. And the way that I see humans is that they are also cells in the body. And in the way that phytoplankton in the ocean produces dimethyl sulfide gas, which helps to create the clouds, which helps to regulate the temperature, the phytoplankton are doing their job. We're just not doing our job. But then what is our job? Well, see, nobody's told us what our job is. And so basically what I say is, our job is to be a partner with nature and to partner with these natural cycles to ensure that things are stable on the planet. So that, and if we start actually doing that, if we can find a way to bring in the tools that we've got, the tools of capitalism, for example, to actually go in towards that direction, then we can do incredible things and we can do them very, very fast. The question, though, is how do we communicate that in a way that people go, aha, and they know what they should do in order to bring that about. Mm-hmm. But, as I say,
Right. Well, somehow there has to be pressure put both on the media and on the political system, because the political system is in denial in Australia and here in the United States. I mean, we've become a nation of great climate deniers, which just boggles my imagination. I don't even understand it.
Yeah. And then, of course, the question is, how do you shift that? So I was reading I read an interview by it was a book review by Robert Hunziker, and he was reviewing a book that was a new book out talking about the power elite, right? The most powerful people in the world. So this is one of the things that I write about in What Comes Next is I refer to the superclass. So there was a book that I read, came out in 2006, I think. Superclass, the powerful people who run the world and the world that they're making, by David Rothkopf. And what he does, he says, he looks at where power lies, and he creates a statistical category of people, the most powerful and influential people on the planet, and he focuses on the most powerful 6,000. So this is 1 in a million, and he calls them the superclass. And he gets his researchers to research them, and he looks for the patterns, and he finds the patterns. And so one of the interesting thing about the superclass is that some people are in there and they stay in there. Other people come into it and then they leave again. So, for example, Tony Blair, when he was in the UK Prime Minister, would have been in the superclass because of his influence and his power. When he left, he was probably stayed in it because he stayed influential. He's still highly connected. President Bush Jr., for example, was in the superclass when he was a president, but when he left, he's probably out of it because he might be wealthy and powerful, but he's not playing anymore. Mm-hmm. And so the superclass is predominantly old white men. They're predominantly American and European. There's an increasing Asian influence and so forth. So when you start to understand, you've got to be able to get your head around the enemy in order to know who the enemy is. And this new book that Hunziker has written basically is updated that whole conversation. Power is more concentrated now still. It's concentrated in a very, very small number of hands. And that's actually a positive thing in a way, because there's only a small number of people that you actually need to get through. There was a bus got bombed in Yemen a couple of weeks ago, and 40 children were killed. You could put 40 of these people into that bus and bomb it if you can get those right 40 people. Or you can say to these guys, hey guys, you can't win this. If we trigger a Permian style extinction event, it doesn't matter how many cans of beans you've got in your bunker. The only way to actually fix this thing is to fix it. There's no running from this. Okay. Yeah. And I've come to this because I've spent a lot of time in this doomer space and reading the stuff and filling myself up with near-term extinction and reading about the preppers And it's just, it dawns on me, there's only one way, there's only one alternative. We either get swept away or we fight it. Now, I don't know whether we can fight it. I don't know whether we can turn the ship around. I don't know whether it's already too late. I don't know that. But it seems like if I was in that class of the most powerful people in the world who ultimately could make that switch overnight, they could say, okay, we're going to pull out of fossil fuels and immediately put all of those resources into renewables or whatever. They are the people that we need to bring on board. The trouble is that they're the beneficiaries of the system that we've got right now, which is destroying the planet. And those people probably don't play well together, and they need to act they need to act together to bring this thing about. So again, so it's complicated, but by drilling down into that whole system of where does power lie, you start to have these questions which weren't previously been asked. These are the unasked questions. And so you can't have an answer to an unasked question. And now that we're starting to ask the questions, we're starting to see some answers come out, which allow us to at least have some sort of a conceptual frame about how we might be able to make a really rapid shift in our global society.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think that this thing could be approached technologically, like we could geoengineer our way out of this situation? I mean, do you think that's possible?
I think that, we're always looking for the magic bullet. Is technology going to save us? Is this going to save it? If we were hypothetically to be 100 years from now looking back going, whew, that was a close shave, it would have been a bit of everything. Right? It would have been artists involved. There would have been some geoengineering. It depends also on what you mean by geoengineering. I mean, we already are geoengineering just by the fact of us pumping all that carbon into the atmosphere as an act of geoengineering. Turning off the carbon would be an act of geoengineering, But geoengineering is in terms of flying planes and dropping sulfur particles in the atmosphere to reflect the sunlight. I dare say that will happen because you can't stop somebody trying it. Right? This is one of the big ethical issues about geoengineering. I think that the geoengineering that will be beneficial is where we partner with the natural processes. So where, for example, the Southern Ocean used to be or is a very large carbon sink. Carbon is pulled out of the atmosphere into the Southern Ocean. That is now failing because the temperatures are increasing. But one of the techniques that it's been discussed is the use of this in some parts of the ocean where there is insufficient iron. If you can put these tiny particles, tiny volumes of iron compounds, it fosters an algae bloom, which potentially then sequesters a huge amount of carbon, but also produces food for fish, which makes it easy to feed people and so forth. So those are the sorts of geoengineering techniques that I think that will have the greatest chances, this is the Gaia 2.0 argument, where we become an agent working with nature. We work with these natural processes.
Right. Like I like that idea of putting, the iron filing particles in to encourage the phytoplankton bloom. That seems like it could be a healthy thing for the earth. But, the sulfur dioxide, that seems very poisonous.
Well, yeah, exactly. And this is what's been resolved at the moment, is trying to understand, because the danger is that you go and do something and you fix one, or you help to fix one problem at the expense of creating another problem. And because we're talking about to do it on a scale where it's large enough to help fix the problem, it means if there is a problem that comes out of it, it's going to be on a large scale. And plus, so there's a lot of ethics being discussed around geoengineering, as well as the engineering aspects to it. But just imagine this. Imagine if, hypothetically, we as a society did actually stop pumping trillions of dollars into subsidies for fossil fuels and instead put them into these sorts of techniques which are demonstrated to be safe. This is the amazing thing, is if we can turn around and put all of our efforts into restoration of the planet, we could do an enormous amount of good in a very short amount of time, which may not save us, but may buy us some more time to come up with something else. You
Right,
know,
right. Well,
so
there are two things during this conversation that really kind of struck me. And the first thing was that um, probiotic treatment on the soil. I mean,
yeah,
that could be done in short order if that's proven to be healthy for the soil, and it turns the soil into a carbon sink.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
that's like a no-brainer. So, you get lots of that going. I mean, I think we're morally obligated to try and do something, right? We can't just sit around and say, well, we can't do anything, so we might as well just die, you know?
Well, I think so, and I think that it's a part of the. I think it's part of us as living organisms is to take actions that to continue life rather than to give up. And I think that the argument that says, if you just keep staring at those Arctic graphs and keep staring at the data about the methane, then you're going to have no other way of seeing the world, which is that we're heading to an imminent extinction. And this is what I try to do, and I'm trying to be the balanced person. I'm not saying I know what the future holds, but I'm saying that if you look over on the other side, there is evidence for these other things, and that the very concept of Peter Fikowski asking these guys with these sequestration techniques, can you scale that up to a gigaton a year or whatever the question was, and for them to say nobody's ever asked me that question before. I'm like, what other questions haven't been asked? How many people do we need? How many people are running the world who are all going to die anyway if we don't shift? How do we get to them? There's an unasked question. There's so many unasked questions. And so to actually then say, look, we're all going to die, we're just going to jump in the bunker with your beans, which ain't going to work anyway if we're all going to die, it just doesn't make sense to me anymore. It did for a while. I was buying into it a lot. Actually, when I started listening to Guy McPherson stuff, I think he's done I think that he is an extremely valuable service. I think that man is genius because and it just comes back down to this buy now argument. In all of the times I've been talking about sustainability, I never had a buy now argument like Guy Lane's argument. Guy McPherson's argument. I call him the other guy. So it's really valuable what he does. Now he says himself he can't project the future, so he draws his prognostication on the basis of the evidence that seems most relevant to him. I'm not denigrating that argument whatsoever. I totally get what he's saying, and I totally support him having that view. And I'm looking at this other stuff and saying, well, there's a whole bunch of unasked questions over here. What happens when you ask those? And it turns out, as with Peter Fikowski, that when he asked, can you scale it up? The guys came back and said, yeah, on this one, no on that one. So I said, okay, we won't go that way, we'll go this way. And so, this is where we are. This is a fantastic inflection point in human civilization. And this is what I say in the very closing chapter of the book, what comes next, is I say it's unsure what's going to happen. Some collapse is inevitable because it's already happened. Collapse is inevitable because we're already collapsing, right? So it's not going to stop tomorrow, which means that more collapse is inevitable. More species going, more superstorms, right? But here's the framework, Gaia 2.0, partnership with the natural process of the planet. Here's the framework that says all civilizations probably go through this, and there's hundreds of trillions of them. Okay, most of them probably collapsed. That some of them learn to swim. Here's frames. Here's some of the people who are working on it. Here's some of the technologies. Here's some of the processes. Here's reason that if you decided that you didn't want to think we're all going to perish, here's where you would put your efforts. Okay, so and this is a fantastic time. This is where it's all been leading. And Guy McPherson, sorry, apart from being, the professor of biology, he's a philosopher. And he says, this is inevitable. We're going to come to this point at some time. You can't, and it's probably inevitable for all civilizations to come to this place.
That's true. I mean, all civilizations do fall. That's just the nature of human existence, Nothing persists forever. And now we find ourselves in the same situation, except it's the entire world. It's not just a given situation, and it's also sort of hidden. What about the hidden nature of this thing? That's kind of astounding how this could be happening all around us in such an aggressive fashion, and yet it's completely hidden. What do you think about that?
Oh, it is completely mind-boggling. And I have a coffee in the morning at this cafe, and I live in a sort of upmarket suburb, and so I get to sit with the Hawthorne bourgeoisie when I have my coffee, and I overhear conversations, and I see what people spend their money on, and it is completely, it's like Sherlock Holmes apparently used to say, the best place to hide something is right where everyone can see it. You know, yeah, it's almost like if you've got a book you want to hide, just stick it on a bookshelf. and so, you know, and I was meeting with the politician the other day, and talking to her about it, and outlining it and sort of describing it to her, and you could see that there was no part of her psyche that could connect to it in any way. It was like, what are you talking about? I might as well have been talking a different language, you know. And she, there's this guy here talking Chinese. I don't really talking about something, you know. So we don't have a way of speaking about it. We don't have an emotional propensity. We don't have a history, and this is why the whole waking people up part of my work and my thinking is really important. I don't know how to do it yet, right? But what I'm understanding is that you've got to tell people stories using narrative structures and help make it real, and the more people talk about it, the easier it is to have people come on board. And also remember, we don't need everyone to wake up. We only need probably 20% of the public to get really angry.
Right.
Actually shift.
Right.
So,
you're kind of going on the 100th monkey sort of philosophy there.
Yeah.
Which I think is very valid. You kind of get a critical mass of people that hold a core belief, and they hold it because they know it's true, and it tends to kind of spread, you know, through osmosis.
But also the 100th monkey, but also the science around tipping points in social systems say that there's a number, it's around 14%. That when you've got that many people pushing in for something, and remember, like we were saying before, the general public, like the Hawthorne bourgeoisie, don't care where the fuel, what type of fuel's in their car, right? They just want to drive the car. So if we were hypothetically to stop, it's in the fiction novel Intervene about the spaceman, my novel, where the spaceman comes to Earth with all of the minerals worth $20 trillion, and he bankrolls the restructure of the global economy. He brings with him this advanced algae, and that algae is grown in order to make a green crude, which you then use to split to produce your diesel and petrol. This is a sci-fi book about a technology which exists today. That in fact, in Brisbane, where I live, there's world-leading research into algae biofuels. Okay, so the bourgeois, the Hawthorne bourgeoisie don't care whether the petrol in their car is grown out of algae or pumped out of the ground, right? So they're not going to fight if we decide to lynch and to pull apart or nationalise or to wind up the fossil fuel industry, as long as they can maintain, you know, aspects of their life. If we were to have liquid fuels made out of algae, we've closed the carbon cycle. We're working within the natural processes. There's a sustainable fuel option right there. Instead of pumping all of this nitrogen out of the cities through the wastewater treatment plants into the ocean, if we diverted that into growing algae for biofuels, we get rid of the nitrogen problem.
No,
you know,
absolutely. Absolutely. You know, there's no lack of creative ideas and solutions. It's a matter of public awareness and political push and media openness. So any of those could be adopted, because it's really more about idea adaptation. And once we have idea adaptation, you know, maybe something could be done at that point.
And there is no shortage of money. I mean, quite apart from anything else, there is, I don't know the numbers in Australia, but it is tens or hundreds of billions of dollars a year subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. Globally, it's in the trillions. This is money, this is public money given to the fossil fuel industry in tax breaks and subsidies. We've got this situation in Queensland right now. The biggest coal mine in the world they want to open up. Biggest coal mine is called the Carmichael mine. Indian company called Adani. It's completely captivated the entire political class of this country. Everybody wants the biggest coal mine on the planet to export 60 megatons of coal per year through the fucking Great Barrier Reef. Okay, so the public don't want it, and there's a very, very effective Stop Adani campaign. Now, if we were to, and the governments are going to hand out billions of dollars to build the railway lines, subsidise. Now, if we just stop subsidising fossil fuels, and put that money into fast-paced research into algae biofuels, bang, problem solved. That part of the problem, not solved. You know what I'm saying? So, so there's all these solutions just lying around like low-hanging fruit. How do we? But the problem is political. The problem is not technological. The problem is not economic. The problem is solely down to politics, and politics is about power. Who's got the power in society? So then the unasked question is, how did they get it? How can we take it away from them?
Yeah, the age-old question.
Well, Louis V, or whatever it was, head came off, and look, it's dire. Where are they going to go? How long is there, what happens? In the book, I also refer to this idea of the last people on Earth, billionaires skiving away in their bunkers with their friends and their families. And what I say is the very, very final, in that scenario, the very final human beings on the planet will be the disciplined security guards who do mercy shots for the survivors and then shoot themselves, right? Okay, but stay with me, right?
It's so grim.
So but stay with me. The moment the bunker door is closed, the security guard shoots the billionaire.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what happens in the real life. The moment the bunker door is closed, the security guy shoots the billionaire, and then the security guy gets to enjoy, what's left. So my point is that in asking these questions about power, or who's got the power, and you realise it's a relatively small group of people who are going to get shot in a bunker by their own security guard. Like, there is an incentive for them to actually turn the ship around. And it's not like they're going to go poor. They're just going to make money in a different way. So you can start to see that there is tools at our disposal. And you don't have those tools when you spend your whole time staring at methane graphs. And that's what I do. So I look at both. And so I'm not saying that there is time to fix this. It might simply be that we're running away. Runaway greenhouse is going to sweep us all up. I don't think there'll be no humans left in 5 years, but conceivably 20, 30 years, I could see possibly that there could be no humans left because of runaway greenhouse. It might simply have run away from us already, maybe. There's evidence for that. And there's evidence to say that there's still time to make substantive changes. And I listen to Johan Rockstrom and Will Stephan. These are the guys behind the Stockholm Resilience Centre and the Planetary Boundaries Framework. They wrote the paper, The Trajectories in the Anthropocene. And they're saying that we're so out of time. And this comes back to this thing again, by now, we're so out of time. If we delay action for 5 or 10 years, so these scientists say, then it's inevitable. So it's the inevitability becomes more inevitable, by the week. So this is the crucial time. This is like the crucial year or the crucial 2 years in the whole of human civilization. We have the Secretary General of the United Nations saying we've got 2 years to start turning the ship around.
I mean, that's kind of miraculous when you think about it. This world's been going on for 4.5 billion years. We've been around as a species for between 100,000 and 200,000 years as a anatomically similar species. How is it that, like, at this very moment, you know what I mean? It's crazy, right?
It is. It's like this bizarro. Remember, it's not the end of life on the planet. Life's gone through these 5 extinction events. Gaia's going to be fine. Right? Gaia will live for 2 billion years. That's not a doubt. Even if we set off all the nukes, she'd come back, right?
Right.
So the issue is human civilization, the human race. And like you say, 200, 300,000 years that we've been around, human civilization, the 12,000-year-old experiment with agriculture. And that's really where the problem started. Right. Whilst we were hunter-gatherers, living in the way of, the way that, indigenous people live, we were part of Gaia. Okay, we were a part of Gaia, just like the monkey in the tree. And we still are part of Gaia, but we're just not doing our jobs now. And so here we are. We are having a conversation in what the best information gathered together by the brightest people on the planet are saying is the last couple of years to wake up before we slip over the cliff. And that is fascinating, and that is a crisis not to be wasted. To use an expression, never let a good crisis go to waste.
Well, there you go. Yeah, don't just sit around and be depressed. Do something.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's fascinating. It's wow.
It is exciting.
Now remember, we couldn't have had this conversation in 1970 because, well, they were having conversations like this in 1970, but they didn't have the blue ocean event imminent. They didn't have the satellites to see what was going on. They didn't have the scientific understanding. Prior to 1974, they didn't even have Gaia theory. We had to get to this point before we could have this conversation.
I know, and even you and I could not be speaking the way we're speaking. We're on opposite sides of this small little globe, but we never could have had visual conversations like this before. I never could have shared my screen and showed you the latest stats on the Arctic.
Yeah, exactly. So there's this sort of it's almost like somebody had written a really, really, really bizarre sci-fi, and they had this character.
Is that our life?
And you've got this character called Jennifer and this character called Guy, and here they are, and here they are trying to wake the world up to the fact that we're 2 years away from possibly slipping into a Permian-style extinction event in which even the wealthiest people in the world suffer and perish in the coming years. And here we are trying to get the public to wake up and just trying to get a head around all of the details and issues and trying to figure out, what do I do tomorrow to achieve that objective? What do I do tomorrow to achieve?
Right. Well, it's turning us all into philosophers and scientists, kind of like scientist philosophers. We're all, anybody who's grappling with this situation, with this demise, taking it into our bodies, taking it into our minds, mixing it up, trying to, connect with some other being to talk about this, like you and I have connected today to talk about this situation. It's kind of boggling. It's amazing.
It is, and I'm sort of over it now. But I remember for years I would be walking around going, I don't understand. Am I the one that's getting it wrong? Am I missing something here? Did I just see the world leading climate scientists say what they did? And then it's like, oh, all the world leaders got together and signed the Paris Agreement. No, it's like there's something happening here, and so you live in the matrix.
Yeah,
you live in the matrix, and this is what I realized when I was talking to these people in the marketplace, and which prompted me to write this book, is that my knowledge is very, very specific. I've been drilling down into this part of the environmental space for a very long time. When I did my environmental science degree, most of the people around me were interested in ecology and trees and wildlife. But for me, I was interested in climate. And I was one of the very few people, in fact, they didn't even really talk about climate much in the degree that I did 20 years ago. And so I've just been pursuing climate and trying to understand more and more about climate. And it's almost by chance that I find myself being somebody who has expertise in this very, very esoteric field around abrupt climate change and sort of understanding the machinery of it and the implications of it. And yet here I am. So I don't question that anymore. And I'm an INTP, that's my Myers-Briggs indicator type. So I'm an introvert. So I actually spend huge amounts of time. That's how I can write, because I just sit down on my own and I write and I read, But I'm also an Aries, and so I'm sort of, I like to sort of I like to cut my own path and find my own ideas. And you put those things together, climate change, introvert, Aries, you know, and also I'm sort of like largely unencumbered. I don't have family around me. I don't have kids. And so I've been able basically to follow this interest and see where it goes. And then having the sense, I want my life to contribute to this thing working.
Yeah. You want your life to have been worth living, so you want to throw yourself at the most critical thing, and this is it, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I want to help change the outcome. You look back in 100 years, they'll say there were thousands of people who were integral to this thing being fixed, and that guy is one of them. And
yeah.
You know, and a lot of the things that I do, it's very hard to get people to read books. But books are really valuable because you get their attention for a couple of hours, and if you can tell a good story, it sticks in people's minds. And the way that I've written What Comes Next, reading the work of Joe Romm, who's the viral communications guy. Joe Romm is a climate scientist who really wanted to get his message across, and so he studied viral communication and he wrote it down in a book. And I was reading that book as I was writing What Comes Next.
Oh,
and so,
fabulous.
And so that's why it's written in the first person. That's why in the opening paragraph I say, imagine I'm standing next to you talking to you. It's this personal connection. I try to take these big ideas but make them simple to understand. You know, it's short, it's punchy, it's pacey, it's got all sort of there's different sections in there. And so, you know, maybe this book will take off and it will be huge and it will help to wake people up. Remember, we don't need to wake them all up. We only need, say, 15 or 20% of the public getting really angry about this stuff. And if not this one, it'll be the next one, you know, and that's what I do. And I'm going to keep trying to figure it out because I don't have anything else that I want to do. This is all I want to do.
Well, totally understand. I'm also an Aries and an introvert.
Oh, yeah.
And yes, and no children, and need to do something with my life. So it's a common thing. I guess there are a lot of Aries introverts with no children who need to do something with their lives.
Well, do they make up 20% of the population? Maybe that's the 20% we need. Calling all Aries introverts with no children.
There you go.
That's something for you, you know. And this is one other thing that I refer to in the book is I say, you know, philosophically, you know, why are we here? Okay, I don't have a problem with that anymore. I actually, for a long time, I'm a graduate of the Landmark Forum, and they've got a frame called Empty and Meaningless, which is this existential frame that says there is no reason for human existence. I believe that. Actually, I believe that since I came across the idea in my 20s. A girlfriend introduced me to Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, existentialist writers. And in the Landmark Forum, they summed it up so perfectly that I started using their language. But I think about 3 days ago, it occurred to me, this is after reading the Gaia 2.0 paper that came out, this is Lenton and Latour, it's referred to in the book. And they're saying that when humans partner with nature, then it endures. And I realised we're not here for no reason. We're here for a very good reason. We're just not doing our jobs. Why are we here? We're here to partner with the natural living systems of planet Earth to allow her to continue on with this robust biological system on the planet, as opposed to having it baked and irradiated and for it to pop back up again. Right? Because if Gaia didn't want to be rich and abundant in life, then how come is it after every extinction event, she becomes rich and abundant with life? Our job is to help return and then maintain the rich and abundance of life on this planet. That is why we are here. That's it. And we're either doing that or we're not. And there's lots of different roles in that, one of which is communicating, you know, which is what we do. We are doing our job, Jennifer.
We're trying. We're having a conversation here when we could be doing other things. You know?
I am at work right now. I am at work doing the job that I was born to do. And I was born by this living system as a cell in the living system. I'm either a cell that is malfunctioning like a tumor, or I'm a cell that's performing its function. I didn't know what my function was. It took me until I was, it took me until 35, this is the wake up in the year 2000, to realize the name of the thing. It was to do with sustainability, and it was to do with paradigm shift. It took me a long time to figure out what my role was, but now I'm very clear with what my role is, and I'm at work every day, dutifully.
No, we have found our raison d'etre. We have our vocation. We've got a plan.
Yep. Now we just got to figure out how to make it pay.
Go team. No problem. Oh, Guy Lane. Well, it is such a pleasure to talk to you today.
Yeah, likewise. It's been really awesome. Really lovely, mate.
Best of luck to you, and I hope that you sell 1 million copies of your book, What Comes Next. I've downloaded it. It's available on Kindle if you're an Amazon Kindle user. It's an easy read. It's engaging, and it'll kind of get you activated. Get your head out of the methane charts and do something. Right?
Yeah, that's right. Even though it might be no point to do it, you do it anyway, I reckon, because that's your job.
That's our job. That's our job.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Guy. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today.
All right then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Visit the Northern Territory, home to shitloads of Aussie icons. Bob's Knob, Ned's Knob, Hungry Knob, Big Knob Waterhole, and of course these knobs. The NT is also home to our greatest natural treasure. No, not that. Gas. Which is why we're stoked to finally open it up to fracking. Fracking is a complex mining process whereby gas companies inject donations into the arseholes of politicians to release access to land so they can tap into shale and coal seam gas deposits. Is it safe? Not according to America's top research, which shows fracking poisons the air, water, children, and generally every living thing in its vicinity.
This is America.
But hey, we've seen it working fine in Australia.
Just ask this scientician,
who says fracking is totes safe if properly managed. So relax, because it's not like the NT is littered with decades of clusterfucks and environmental mismanagement. Well, apart from that one-time radioactive shit leached into Kakadu National Park, or when acid leached into the MacArthur River, copper leached into river systems, PFAS toxins leaked into drinking water. But other than those and many other fails, you can trust us to properly manage fracking in the NT and look on the bright side. It will create stacks of new jobs. Not for you, silly, for us, in our booming revolving door industry. Unfortunately, it will also create stacks of emissions, the equivalent of building 130 coal-powered plants, or like taking a massive dump on the Paris Climate Agreement. But we have no choice. We have to solve the gas crisis. You know, the one that doesn't actually exist, because we've got shit tons of gas. It's just that gas companies make more money exporting it overseas, which is exactly what they'll do with gas fracked in the NT, meaning the economic benefit for you will be approximately fuck all. Because you see, the real gas crisis is that these c***s run your government. That's why, instead of capping gas exports and company profits, we're bullying the NT into fracking the outback and fucking public health, farming and indigenous communities, the world-famous tourism industry, and the climate all in one go. Australian government, with a government like us who needs terrorists. Authorised by the Department for Environmental Terrorism. Approved by the Minister for Genuine Satire.